Hey everyone, I'm Dustin, CEO of 630. Thanks for your purchase of the E Bike Rickshaw like I have here in front of me. This one may vary a little bit from what you have at home with the logos and whatnot, but this is the same E Bike Rickshaw. And today I wanted to walk you through some safety elements and talk to you about all the things you need to know before taking your first ride on your E Bike Rickshaw, and also give you some tips and pointers to stay as safe as possible on your rides. Okay, first and foremost, I don't know if you did the assembly yourself or if you hired a professional to do the assembly. We always would recommend having a professional do the assembly, but if you did it yourself, the number one most important element is going to be the brakes, especially these disc brakes. So it is absolutely imperative that the disc brakes have been adjusted properly and they can stop properly. In addition to that, there are brake pads inside of the calipers on these disc brakes. Those can wear down over time, especially if you're frequently having passengers on the back going downhill and putting a lot of pressure on the brakes. Also, if you're riding fast, coming to a stop very quickly, again, going to wear the pads down. Now, I highly recommend checking the pads at least every 100 miles. I would say if you're consistently carrying a load over 300 pounds, I'd recommend checking the brake pads even every 50 miles. Now, it can be just as simple as looking right here at the brake pad, and you can see it on the disc. How much more pad do you have left on the disc? When you look down there, it'll be fairly noticeable if you see the pad worn, or you're gonna see when you pull the brakes up here, they might be getting less and less responsive over time as the pads start to wear down. If that's something you're not comfortable replacing, we recommend take it to a professional, have a mobile mechanic come to your house. They can replace the brake pads, they can adjust the brakes, and make sure that you can stop in the proper amount of time. Also stop properly when going downhill. Now, brakes and gears are one of those things, no matter how perfectly you adjust them in the moment, over time they're going to lose their tune, especially depending on how you ride it, how many bumps you go over, what kind of wear and tear you're putting your bicycle through. So you're gonna need to get your bike or have your brakes periodically readjusted. Also, the gears are going to need to be readjusted as well. Now, moving through the e-bike, there's a couple bolts on the e-bike that are some of the most important bolts on the e-bike that need to be tightened to ensure safe riding. Up here on the axle, we have our axle nuts. So when you receive your e-bike rickshaw, the front wheel will come off the bike. There's a nut on either side of the axle that secures the wheel onto the fork. That bolt must be tightened to the point of not being able to tighten anymore. Now, I don't recommend stepping or kicking on the wrench or things like that, but to the point where if you put a fair amount of torque on it, that bolt cannot move anymore. Again, you don't have to put your full body weight on it or go to that extreme, but you want to make sure you're tightening your arm and your muscle to push that bolt down as tight as possible. We want to ensure that at no point this wheel would come off. And before you start riding, double check that you have in fact tightened that bolt down all the way. Now, when we move up to the handlebars, these are also very important bolts. On the handlebar stem here, there's actually two bolts that tighten the tilting of the handlebars right here on top. Those are tightened with an Allen key. Again, those need to be tightened to the point of not being able to turn your Allen key anymore. You want to be able to forcibly get it to the point of not being able to turn it anymore. If you put your body weight down on these handlebars and these two bolts are loose, you can slip down, people can hit their face on the handlebars. It's a very vital bolt. So just ensure that those are tightened as tight as you can get them. Now, as is this bolt right here into the stem. This is the bolt to raise and lower the handlebars. If this is loose, the handlebars will move, they will shift. If that came loose when you were driving, you would lose all capability to steer, at which point I would just recommend engaging the brakes. Now, these are not common issues that occur, but it's important to know which bolts are most important, which bolts need to be tightened, so you ensure prior to your first ride, you get them to that tightness level. And again, same thing with this one. If you're adjusting your height, loosening it, things like that, make sure you get to the point of not being able to tighten it anymore. Again, you don't have to go to crazy lengths to put extreme body weight on it or torque it with tools. Just make sure you can't turn it anymore with your own hands. In addition to that, there's some other bolts, not necessarily as detrimental to the performance of the e-bike. The two I just mentioned are really important, but on the quick release, you're going to want to ensure that that's tight and clamped. If not, your seat's going to slide around. Also underneath here on the seat rails, there's the bolts that allow for the tilting of the seat. Make sure those are tight, because if not, you could slip off the back of the seat or slip forward off the seat. So you're going to want to make sure those are nice and tight as well. Now, lastly, I would say with the passenger seat especially, there are 4 bolts that keep this seat attached. You just want to ensure if you're using a ratchet of some sort, keep ratcheting that. And again, just to the point where you cannot tighten it anymore, all 4 of those need to be tight. What I recommend doing too is get all 4 of them tight, then move to another one and crank it again. And then you'll go to another side. As you tighten one, another one may get looser. So it may take a few times kind of going around in a circle to check all 4 of those bolts to just ensure that they're tightened on there perfectly. Nothing's going to move, and just make a couple trips around. Because again, if you have passengers on the back here, you want to ensure their safety when you're out and riding. Now, in addition to that, we have another video with more detailed assembly instructions on all the bolts that are important. Now, other safety things I just want to address when riding this e-bike rickshaw. If you're going downhill with a heavy load, 400 plus pounds, 300 plus pounds, this is a heavy bike with a heavy load. So make sure, again, prior to the ride, your brakes are dialed in. And as you're coming downhill, you want to ease into the brakes as you're going down any hill on this e-bike rickshaw. Under no circumstance should you be flying down a hill at 20, 25, 30 miles an hour, and then at the bottom of the hill, want to pull on these brakes, especially if you have a load on the back or passengers on the back. You cannot do that. That is unsafe. If you're going down big hills, please be engaging the brakes the whole way down, keeping your pace so you don't have to slam on the brakes. If you have a lot of weight going down a hill very fast and you try to pull the brakes at the very last minute, that will not be safe. So do not do that. Ease into the brakes as you're going down the hill. That is very, very important. Now, in addition to that, on the screen here, you are going to see your pedal assist levels, and you are also have your pedal assist adjusting up and down right here. And you actually will have your throttle on the left hand as well. For this sample, we had it on the right hand. We've switched it to the left hand. Now, a couple very important things. On your pedal assist here on the monitor, if at any times it says a number greater than 0, that means your motor is engaged, active, and live. If you shift it down to 0, that will disengage the motor, at which time you don't have to worry about anything happening. So, as this bike is sitting idle on the ground, always, always, always keep it in 0. I've seen accidentally people pulling the throttle, pushing the throttle, hitting the throttle while it's here. Keep it in 0 until you are mounted on the bike, in position to ride and ready to go, at which point you can put it into level 1, level 2, whatever you're comfortable with. Which segues me into my next point. Do not start out in level 5. Start out in level 1, 2, and max 3. Once you're riding in open space, then feel free to shift into 4 and 5 as you're on straightaways, but under no circumstances should you start out at anything above 3, especially if you're in tight quarters or people around you. It's going to give you a good kick as it is in 1, 2, and 3, and you don't need the level of power 4 and 5 as you're starting out. It is not recommended. We don't advocate for that. Please only use the 4 and 5 levels as you're on flat straightaways and you have open space. So now, also using the throttle. Again, when you're in level 1, the throttle will be engaged. I recommend keeping it in level 1, getting comfortable riding around, and getting familiar with how much you engage the throttle to get the motor going. How much you push this throttle is how much output you're going to get from the motor. Also, practice riding with and without passengers in safe spaces. Go to a parking lot, get comfortable, make sure you have a feel for the steering. If you've never ridden an electric tricycle or a tricycle, period, the steering on a tricycle is much different than the steering on a two-wheel bike. So please, practice steering before you put passengers on the back. When this arrives to your house, don't open it up and throw passengers on it right away. Not recommended by any means at all. Now, segueing from that into the idea that this is a tricycle. So you have to disperse and distribute your weight differently. It also handles hills differently. You cannot drive perpendicular across a hill on a tricycle. So obviously if you have a hill like this, you can ride up. Do not ride perpendicular to a hill because it will tip over, whereas a two-wheel bike would not do that. Now, this is not true for every hill. There's a certain grade variance. If you can avoid riding horizontal or perpendicular across any hills, that is advised. That is our recommendation. But a low-grade hill should be achievable to some extent, but not with passengers on the back. And if you have to do that, you need to lean towards the hill. Do not lean away from the hill. Keep your body leaning towards the hill. Shift your weight on your buttocks towards the hill to make sure you keep all tires on the ground at all time. Now, that's another thing is turning. When you're turning this electric tricycle, disengage the throttle and the pedal assist. That is very, very important. When you're coming into turns on this electric rickshaw, do not be throttling through the turn. Back off, make the turn, at which point, once you're through the turn, you can use the throttle, re-engage the pedal assist. That creates a more stable and safe ride all the way through, especially if you have passengers on the back. Now, when you are turning, it's also important to get familiar with how to adjust your weight. So if you're turning to the right, you want to lean a little bit to your left side. If you're turning to the left, you want to lean a little bit to the right side. I like to kind of also, sometimes you can lean this way, but shift your body this way. So you're just shifting to your outside butt cheek. But again, if you're leaning this way, you want to make sure you're also putting weight back this way. Now, as you get familiar with how to ride your e-rickshaw, it'll become a little more natural. When you're turning this way, you're kind of leaning that way. When you're turning this way, you're leaning to the outside, right? So you're leaning away from the turn. And the balancing will be much easier if you don't accelerate through the turns. Now, this is not like a two-wheel bike where you need to keep those wheels moving at a certain pace in order to keep the balance of the e-bike. In the situation of the e-bike rickshaw, you actually want to back off the throttle and the pace and the speed a little bit to make sure you keep all three wheels balanced while you're turning. And again, if this is something that doesn't feel natural to you, as you start riding an electric tricycle, it will, trust me. You can check out our videos. We've had a lot of people test ride and ride the e-bike rickshaw. After a little while, half hour to an hour, you'll have the hang of it, no problem. But when it arrives to your house, if it doesn't feel natural, it's probably because you've been riding a two-wheel bike for most of your life, and that just has a very, very different feel from a tricycle, let alone something with passengers on the back if you so choose to ride with passengers. Now, last thing I will say is this is an electronic e-bike. This has power. This has a motor. Be responsible, be aware, be cautious, and keep in mind if you have passengers on the back, it's a heavier load, more pressure on the brakes, and just more things to be cautious about. Okay, a few other things to mention just to make sure that you're going to be as safe as possible when riding this e-bike rickshaw. You have a horn located up here as well. This is going to be important if you're riding on trails and things like that to notify other riders you're coming, especially with the width of this. you're going to take up a fair amount of a lot of bike paths, just give them notification. You have that horn there. It's there for a reason. Now, in addition to that, if you have passengers on the back, always use the seatbelt. Keep them strapped in. Just in the situation of if you take a turn, nobody falls out, nobody slides out. If everybody's buckled in, you're going to have a safe, fun ride. You also have these handles here. Ensure that your passengers are holding on to that, and also that they're buckled in for complete safety. Now, also in addition to that, you have this footrest here. Please advise your riders to put their feet on here. And one thing I wanted to advise about being cautious about is you do have the tires back here. So please keep your loose clothing up. Don't let it get caught up in the tire. And also it's important, whoever your passenger is, to just be mindful of not hitting their leg on the tire. Now you can sit back here with the passengers that we've advised about, up to 3 kids and 2 adults. You just have to be mindful of your leg position so it doesn't get caught in the tire, and loose clothing does not get caught anywhere as well. We just want to advise you of that. We've never seen it happen, but it's important. So stay buckled, be advised of your leg, keep your feet on the footrest, and also have your passengers hold on at all times. So I hope that helps and you enjoy your e-bike rickshaw experience. If you have any other questions at all, please email us, the team at sixthreezero.com, or call us 310-982-2877. And thank you so much for joining the 630 family. And don't forget, it's your journey, your experience. Enjoy the ride.